Hey there, deep divers. You ready to dive into today's news?
Always. What do we have for today?
Well, we've got a lot to cover, actually. Cyclones are brewing, finances are soaring, and no, those aren't metaphors.
Sounds intriguing. Lay it on me.
We'll be tackling climate change negotiations, India making some bold moves in the transportation sector, and, well, this was interesting. A certain cuddly creature you might not expect holding the key to ecological balance.
Okay, now you've got me really curious. It's all about making those connections, right? Finding those threads that tie these seemingly distant events together.
Exactly. You ready to get those mental gears turning?
Absolutely. Let's dive right in.
Okay, let's start with something that's probably on everyone's mind. Climate change. COP29, the UN's climate change conference, is right around the corner November 11th. Mark your calendars. And let me tell you, this year, it's all about the money.
Oh, absolutely. It's being called the Finance COP for a reason. This time around, the focus is laser sharp. It's on getting that much-needed financial aid to developing nations.
Which is a really big deal, right? Because these are the countries that are often hit hardest by climate change, even though they contributed the least to causing it. So what are we looking at here? What are they hoping to achieve at this COP29?
Well, the big goal is to finally make good on a promise that was made way back in 2009, securing $100 billion, and that's billion with a B, each year in climate finance from developed nations.
Wow, that's a hefty sum.
It is. Think of it this way. If they can actually pull this off, this funding could be huge, a real game changer for renewable energy projects in developing countries.
It makes you wonder, what happens if these negotiations fail?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? If these talks stall, we could be in for some even more dramatic climate impacts and sooner than we think. The stakes are incredibly high this time around.
It sounds like it. Now, speaking of developing nations making big moves, India just announced plans for a brand new major port, their 13th. And it sounds like there's some strategic thinking happening in the Bay of Bengal.
Definitely, this new port, it's going to be on Great Nicobar Island, and it's about a lot more than just, having another harbor.
So there's more to it than meets the eye.
Absolutely. It's being touted as a gateway, and it's all part of India's big ambition to become a major player in global trade.
A gateway to what, exactly?
Global shipping routes. This new port is strategically placed. It's near major players like Singapore and Colombo. Right now, a huge chunk, about 75% of India's transshipped cargo, it has to go through those other hubs.
And this new port changes that.
Exactly. It could really shift that balance, bring more traffic and more trade directly to India.
That's a bold move, and it could mean some big economic benefits for India down the road.
It could indeed.
Okay, so we've got ambitious ports in the works. But wait, there's more? India's also giving those charming old lighthouses along its coastline a 21st century makeover. Now, that's something I'd like to hear more about.
It's really interesting, actually. It's a great example of how India is trying to walk that line, balancing preserving their incredible heritage while also growing their economy.
It's a tough balance to strike, so how are they pulling it off?
Well, these renovated lighthouses, they won't just be historical landmarks. They're being designed to be tourist hotspots. Think museums, parks, the whole 9 yards.
Now, that's what I call a glow-up. And I love that they're finding ways to create jobs, boost their tourism, and keep their history alive and well all at the same time. But the development train doesn't stop there. India's UDAN scheme, which aims to make air travel more accessible, just hit a big milestone its 7th anniversary.
It has, UDAN, and that stands for Uday Deshka Amnagrek, which means let the common citizen of the country fly. It's been a game changer. It's really important for connecting those far-flung, remote areas of India.
So over the past 7 years, it's really taken off.
It has. The scheme has gone through several phases, and each one has expanded its reach, expanded its impact.
So it's not just about making flights cheaper. It's about connecting people, creating opportunities.
You've got it. For people in those remote regions, having access to air travel that can open doors, better healthcare, easier access to education, job opportunities, things a lot of us take for granted. It's really about creating a more interconnected, a more equitable India.
That's fantastic. And you know what this reminds me of? India is also taking a long, hard look at creating a more sustainable transportation system, and that's where this idea of multimodal transport comes in.
Exactly.
Can you unpack that for us a little?
Absolutely. Picture this. You hop off a high-speed train, and you seamlessly transfer to a whole network of electric buses or maybe even bike sharing stations.
Yeah.
That's the vision of multimodal transport. It's about weaving together all these different ways of getting around: buses, trains, bikes, even just good old-fashioned walking into one smooth, green, and ultimately enjoyable transportation experience.
So instead of everyone relying on their cars, contributing to all that pollution and those awful traffic jams, it's about having options,
Yeah.
right? And India's already making moves to make this happen. For example, Hyderabad has implemented a multimodal transport system. They call it MMTS for short, and it integrates their suburban rail with a whole bunch of other public transportation options.
It's a great example. Not only does it tackle traffic congestion, but it makes life easier for the people living there, makes their commutes so much smoother. And the best part is, it's not just happening in Hyderabad. Other cities are jumping on board. Places like Mumbai and Ahmedabad are also making strides in developing their own integrated transport systems.
It's really encouraging to see a country like India, with such a huge population and such rapid development, taking the lead on building a more sustainable future.
I completely agree. These are some complex challenges, but it's clear that India is thinking long-term, looking for innovative solutions that work for everyone.
Speaking of challenges, let's shift gears for a moment to something a little more immediate. Cyclone Dana. It seems like it's got its sights set on Odisha, and things could get a little rough.
Cyclones, they're a force to be reckoned with. Cyclone Dana's packing some serious punch, with winds expected to hit anywhere between 100 to 120 kilometers per hour. That's strong enough to tear roofs off buildings, uproot trees, the works.
Wow, that's powerful. What can people in Odisha do to prepare for something like that?
Well, the most important thing is to stay informed, right? Keep an eye on the news, follow the guidance of those local authorities. They know best. They'll be issuing warnings and evacuation orders if need be. And of course, it's always a good idea to have that emergency kit ready to go, essentials: water, food, flashlights, a first aid kit, that kind of thing.
It's always better to be prepared, especially with these powerful storms. Now, while India is dealing with those immediate threats, they're also making their presence known on the global stage. They've been participating in some pretty impressive naval exercises with some key allies recently.
They have. India just wrapped up two major naval exercises, Malabar and Kakadu. And Malabar, that one's causing quite a stir because it involves the Quad countries: India, Australia, Japan, and the U.S.
There's always a lot of attention on those joint operations, Malabar especially. What's the bigger picture here? What's it all about?
Well, these exercises, especially Malabar, are being seen as, let's say, a strategic response to China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. It's no secret that China's been flexing its muscles, economically and militarily. And that's led to some, shall we say, uneasiness among other nations in the region.
Makes sense.
So these joint military exercises, they serve a couple of purposes. One, they strengthen those military ties, those bonds between the countries. But they also send a message, especially to China.
A message of unity.
Exactly. They want to make it clear that they are committed to keeping the Indo-Pacific free and open.
It sounds like a balancing act, a way to deter any potential aggression while still keeping those lines of communication open.
Exactly. And that's why you often see these exercises paired with diplomatic efforts, reassurances that this isn't about containing anyone. It's about upholding international law, freedom of navigation, all of that. It's a complex geopolitical dance for sure.
That's a great way to put it. Now, speaking of a delicate balance, but on a completely different note, let's talk about a creature that's as adorable as it is endangered: the red panda. Earlier, you mentioned they might hold the key to something much bigger.
I did. These guys are incredible. They live in the eastern Himalayas, parts of India, Nepal, Bhutan, China, and they're specially adapted to those high-altitude forests, living off a diet of mostly bamboo. But here's the thing. Their numbers are dwindling, and that's a big, big warning sign.
Why is that? What's threatening them?
The biggest problem is us, unfortunately. Habitat loss is the biggest culprit, and it's driven by deforestation and habitat fragmentation. We're encroaching further and further into their territory, and these red pandas are losing their homes, they're losing their food sources, and here's what makes it even more concerning. The red panda is what's called an indicator species.
So they are like a canary in a coal mine.
Precisely. Their well-being, it's a direct reflection of the overall health of the entire Himalayan ecosystem.
So if the red pandas are in trouble, that's not a good sign for anyone.
You got it. Their decline, it's a symptom of some much larger issues: deforestation, climate change, loss of biodiversity, these have ripple effects, and not just for the red panda, but for all of us.
It's a stark reminder of how interconnected everything really is. Now let's circle back to copy 29 for a moment, because those climate finance negotiations are coming up fast. Beyond that headline figure of $100 billion, what are some tangible ways that this money could actually help these countries deal with climate change?
It's a great question because it's not just about writing a check. Climate finance has to be strategic if it's going to work. It needs to be tailored to the specific challenges and the unique opportunities in each nation.
So one size does not fit all.
Definitely not. For some countries, the focus might be adapting to those unavoidable impacts of climate change. Things like rising sea levels. Think seawalls, developing those drought-resistant crops, maybe even relocating entire communities that are most at risk. For other countries, it might be more about moving away from those fossil fuels and switching to cleaner energy sources, solar, wind, geothermal, that kind of thing. This could involve things like financing those renewable energy projects, providing the technical know-how to develop sound and sustainable energy policies.
So it's really about empowering these countries to build a better future for themselves, a more resilient and sustainable one.
Exactly. It's about giving them the resources and the support they need to chart their own course. And it's important to remember that climate finance, it doesn't always have to come directly from governments. It can come from private investors, philanthropic organizations, even creative mechanisms like green bonds, you name it.
It's a team effort, really, which makes sense given the sheer scale of the challenge that we're up against with climate change. And speaking of multifaceted approaches, we've been talking a lot about India's efforts to green their transportation system. But what are some of the hurdles they face in making that whole multimodal vision a reality? What are they up against?
That's the million-dollar question. And it really gets to the heart of urban planning in a rapidly developing nation. One of the biggest hurdles, frankly, is just the sheer scale of it all. India's cities are some of the most densely populated in the entire world. So coordinating this complex web of transportation options, it's a massive logistical challenge.
It's like trying to conduct an orchestra during rush hour. And on top of that, you've got to get all those different players on the same page. The government agencies, the local authorities, the private companies. That's no easy feat.
Absolutely not. Coordination is key here. You can't have everyone working in silos and expect a seamless experience for commuters. And then, of course, there's the funding. Developing that kind of robust, reliable public transportation infrastructure, the kind that India needs, takes serious financial investment.
And it's not just about building new stuff, right? It's about making sure it all works properly, that it's maintained properly.
Exactly. A shiny new metro system is great, but if the trains are always late or the stations are packed like sardine cans, people aren't going to use it. Reliability, efficiency, those are key to making public transportation a truly appealing alternative to hopping in your own car.
So true. No one likes being crammed into a hot, crowded bus if they can avoid it. But even with the best transportation system in the world, there's still one more piece of the puzzle.
And what's that? You're absolutely right. Changing public perceptions, changing behaviors, that's maybe the biggest challenge of all. In India, many people, it's just ingrained. They're used to traveling by private car or by two-wheelers. To get them to embrace public transportation, you need a real shift in mindset. That's where things like really effective communication come in, public awareness campaigns, maybe even some incentives to sweeten the deal.
It's about showing people that this is better, not just for the environment, but for their wallets, for their stress levels. Less time stuck in traffic means more time to enjoy life, right?
Wow.
Now, we've been talking a lot about India, but let's zoom out for a second. Are there any other countries out there that are doing this well that India and other nations could learn from when it comes to building these successful multimodal transportation systems?
Definitely. There are some shining examples around the world that we can all learn from. Singapore, for instance, they've absolutely nailed it. They've created a public transportation system that's efficient, it's user-friendly, and it seamlessly connects all those different modes of transport, buses, trains, taxis, you name it.
I've heard great things about Singapore's system. What's their secret? What are they doing right?
Well, they haven't been shy about investing in technology, that's for sure. They have an amazing integrated ticketing system. Imagine being able to pay for the bus, the train, whatever, all with one card or even just an app on your phone.
That would make things so much easier.
Right. And it gets better. Real-time information about arrivals, departures, it's all right there at your fingertips. It takes all the guesswork out of getting around.
That's impressive. Any other cities we should be keeping an eye on?
Copenhagen, Denmark is another one. They've gone all in on cycling infrastructure. Imagine a city where it's often faster and easier to just hop on your bike than to deal with the hassle of a car. That's Copenhagen.
Now, that's a city after my own heart. It's really amazing how a well-designed city can actually encourage healthier, more sustainable ways to get around.
It really is. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Creating cities that are good for the planet, good for business, and good for people.
Cities that work for everyone. Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today. Climate change, infrastructure, global power plays, even adorable red pandas. It's incredible how these seemingly unrelated events are all connected.
Isn't it fascinating? That's what I love about these deep dives. When we dig a little deeper, connect the dots, we start to see those patterns, those hidden connections that shape our world.
It really makes you realize that everything is connected, like that butterfly effect thing.
It really is. Sometimes the smallest actions can have these huge ripple effects that we never could have predicted, but that's actually a good thing.
How so?
Well, it means that we all have the power to make a difference, even in small ways, because those small actions, they can add up to big change.
I like that. So we've traveled from the high-stakes world of COP29 and those massive financial negotiations to the front lines of Cyclone Dana, from India's ambitious port projects to those adorable red pandas fighting to survive. If our listeners take away one thing from all of this today, what would you want it to be?
You know, we're living in this time of incredible change. It can feel overwhelming sometimes, right? But it's also a time of incredible possibility. The challenges are real, whether it's climate change, economic inequality, those geopolitical tensions, they're complex, they're interconnected. But here's the thing. They also force us to rethink how we do things, to come up with new solutions, to create a future that's more sustainable, more just, more equitable for everyone.
It's about recognizing those connections, understanding the bigger picture, and realizing that we can all be a part of creating that positive change.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The future isn't something that just happens to us, it's what we make it.
That is a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me today. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
The pleasure was all mine, as always.
And to all our amazing deep divers out there, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap that notification bell so you never miss a future deep dive. We'll be back soon with more fascinating stories, those unexpected connections, and the deeper meaning behind it all. Until then, stay curious, everyone.